I'm going to tell you about a church named Calvary Chapel in San Jose, California. So they made headlines in May of 2020. Worst part of the pandemic, right? There's no vaccine available at the time. People are indoors. And the reason this church was in the news at the time was because they were hosting large indoor services, not requiring face masks and not forcing people to socially distance. Like, even beyond that, the pastor, this is the pastor of that church. His name is Mike McClure. There he is. This guy was basically bragging during live streams about how the church is not compliant with local regulations. He said, and I'm quoting here, "God does not want us to isolate ourselves. All of us need to be in the sanctuary. I don't care what they say. I'm never again going to close the doors, ever." Which I'm sure sounds badass, except when there's a deadly virus going around and we're not exactly certain what the problem is. Maybe listening to the scientists is a good idea. But by the end of the month, May of 2020, the church was holding 2 services every Sunday, each with like 300 to 500 participants. No one was required to wear a mask. Like, this is still the time of the pandemic when you could barely go to a grocery store, when you weren't able to get together with your friends outside because it was still ravaging the public. And this dude, Mike McClure, he encouraged his congregation to avoid masks, even if their health was at risk, not to mention the health of everyone around them. He also said, I'm quoting here, quote, "You have a 99.99% chance of not dying if you catch the virus." Like, that is not true. And he said the mask ordinance in San Jose, where they told people to wear masks in public, was an example of religious persecution in America. So then October of 2020 rolls around. There's no vaccine yet at the time. And the county, the county of Santa Clara was trying to mitigate this threat of COVID. So they said people have to wear face masks in all indoor public spaces with limited exceptions. That means if you're going to a church, you got to wear a face mask. It's indoors. And so, to their credit, the county did not look the other way when it came to this church. They started fining Calvary Chapel, ultimately fining them over $350,000 for violating the local ordinance. But the church never paid up because they're like, "You're persecuting us." So then the county filed a lawsuit against the church, and they demanded the court shut that place down. Not because it's Christian, but because they're not following the rules. And the church was not shut down, but the fines kept coming. And eventually, between the fines and the late fees and the administrative fees and like the actual violations they were breaking, the church owed nearly $4 million to the county. So about 2 years ago, to this day, a Superior Court judge in California issued a decision on this matter. And I want to show you one thing from what this judge said. This judge in 2023 wrote that the county's regulations were legal, and because they applied to the general public, they weren't singling out Christians, right? So the exemptions that they had for like grocery stores, those were sensible ones. And I want to show you this passage from near the end of this judge's ruling. Again, 2023. Look at the top of this page here. "It should appear clear to all, regardless of religious affiliation, that wearing a mask while worshiping one's God and communing with other congregants is a simple, unobtrusive, giving way to protect others while still exercising your right to religious freedom. Unfortunately, defendants, Calvary Chapel, repeatedly refused to model, much less enforce this gesture. Instead, they repeatedly flouted their refusal to comply with the public health orders and urged others to do so. Who cares what the cost, including death?" And look at the next bit. Because the church argued that the amount of money you're making us pay the county is cruel and unusual punishment. It's way too excessive. The judge says the cumulative fine amount that they argue is excessive is solely the result of the church's own egregious conduct and election they chose to continue violating public health orders despite repeated efforts by the county to compel them to comply. Defendants cannot complain about the cumulative size of the penalty when they had control over all of this, yet allowed the penalties to accumulate. In other words, you wouldn't have to pay all this money if you just did the right thing, but you chose not to do the right thing, so you don't get to complain now when the fines get bigger. Love it. So that's what the judge said 2 years ago. And to put it in other words, there's no evidence the local government treated secular activities that were similar to church services any differently from the way they treated this church, right? So the judge also pointed out, so some of those fines, they had to pay $4 million. The judge reduced it to $1.2 million, but the church had to pay $1.2 million to the county, which honestly, that is a small price to pay for the harm caused by that Christian group's ignorance and selfishness. And at the time when they did that, the county actually celebrated that decision. Look at what they said at the time. This is, what's the date on this? April of 2023. This is what the county said at the time. It is the county's job to take care of its residents and protect the public health. The county's response to the pandemic, including the health officer's public health orders and enforcement against entities that refuse to follow the law, saved thousands of lives and resulted in one of the lowest death rates of any community in the United States. Calvary's arguments have been rejected at almost every turn. We're gratified that the court once again saw through their unsupported claims and found them meritless. Fantastic. Love that statement. That's awesome. Now, the church, not surprisingly, said we're going to appeal this ruling. But again, at this point, their arguments have been dismantled. What exactly do you think is up for debate at this point, right? So here's the news. This is the reason I'm talking about this story now, because an appellate court in California has finally issued its ruling because the church appealed the case. So that court has now issued its decision on this church. And guess what they said? Dude, just listen to what the earlier judge said. That judge was right. We are not overturning that judge's decisions. The church was still wrong. The judges said the county didn't treat the church any differently from everybody else. There's no proof otherwise. And even if you didn't like the safety measures, they were applied to everyone equally. And look at what they wrote at the end of their decision. This is like page 37 of 38 right here. Here we go. Further, it cannot be disputed that COVID-19 is a highly contagious disease that caused severe illness and death during a global pandemic, that Calvary Chapel was aware that some of its congregants had contracted COVID-19, and its school, because they have a school, had sustained a serious outbreak, and that the county issued the public health orders requiring face coverings in certain circumstances as part of their effort to slow the spread of COVID. We therefore determine that the undisputed facts show that Calvary Chapel's level of culpability due to violating the public health orders requiring face coverings is high. Yeah, it's your fault. And therefore, the fine in amount of $1.2 million do not violate the excessive fines clause of the Eighth Amendment, because those fines are not grossly disproportionate from the shit you did. Incredible. Incredible. So the appellate court said you still got to pay out, right? So listen, the bottom line is that the church did not have some constitutional right to spread a deadly virus because they're Christian. It's as simple as that. The church they were always free to live stream their services like a lot of churches did. They could have held in-person services that followed the local restrictions like other groups did. But they didn't want to play by the rules. They believed that being Christian gives them the right to ignore laws you don't like and spread a deadly disease and put other people in danger. Thank goodness a court is saying, no, you weren't allowed to do that, and now you got to pay the price for it. And I want to share one last thing with you. This church is like, who are we? We're not going to listen to the government. The government doesn't control us. Well, guess what happened during COVID that this church also did? They asked the federal government to give them over $340,000 in PPP loans to pay for its staff that was out of work. And guess why they were out of work? That money was meant to pay employees who had to stay at home because they couldn't work, even though the church's whole shtick is, no, you're all coming to work because we're keeping this place open. So what the hell are they getting money for? But guess what? It doesn't matter because that loan was forgiven. They had no problem asking the government for money when it helped their bank account. But as soon as the government said, keep other people safe, they're like, how dare you tell us what to do? And how dare you fine us for breaking the law and spreading a virus? And at least now it seems they are going to have to pay for it. And the only recourse they have at this point, if they don't want to pay the $1.2 million, is to go to the California Supreme Court. But again, even forget the makeup of the Supreme Court. There's no legal reason for the Supreme Court to overturn any of this because the church is not making any arguments as to why it should have been allowed to break the rules. It's not like the county was allowing different groups to meet in public, but then had these rules for the church. No, there's no evidence of that. So, hey, some good news. This church actually has to pay a price for putting the rest of us in danger. I'm going to just look one last time for questions. I'm going to ignore some of what you people are saying. Not this one, though. I'd rather wear a mask than pants. You can wear both. No one said you have to choose. What else we got here? I don't know what you people are saying about Dr. Fauci, but I'm going to ignore that. Is there anything else here? Calvary Chapel rakes in millions. They're super popular, or were at one point. I imagine they're still popular today because, again, if you're a right-wing pastor saying we're not going to listen to the government, so let's spread a disease, I'm sure that's appealing to their people with the brain worms. I don't know how it works, but I wouldn't be surprised if they are still popular. This is what happens when I read backwards. I'm seeing the ends of your conversations, and I don't know why they started.